Good afternoon, and welcome to Transylvania University. It's not often that a small campus like ours is able to host two Poets Laureate in the span of 1 year, but here we are. Poet Laureate Joy Harjo visited us in March, and now the new U.S. Poet Laureate Ada Limón will share her marvelous poetry with us today. It is a great privilege for our community to welcome the leading voices of American poetry to our students, our colleagues, and our visitors from all around Central Kentucky and beyond. We are grateful to have you all. And to those of you joining us via live stream, welcome. My name is Morris Manning, Professor of English. I would like to thank our President, Brian Lewis, our Academic Dean and Provost, Rebecca Thomas, our hardworking staff in communications and marketing, Sue Garrison and Graham, and the crew here in Hagen Auditorium. I would also like to thank my colleagues at Transylvania who have generously offered their time and made resources available to make this celebration of American poetry possible. A lot of hands have come together to enrich our campus community, and we can now share that richness with the larger community. And I'd also like to thank our campus security, who earlier this afternoon were very involved in making sure we could have this event. This is wholesome, nourishing stuff. Before we get started, please silence your cell phones. I'm going to make a few remarks and then invite one of our favorite students to introduce Ms. Limón. Following the reading, Ms. Limón will take questions from the audience. If you have a question, please see your program or the posted guidelines. You may text your question, and Professor Jeremy Payton and I will pass the questions on to Ms. Limón. A book signing will follow the Q&A period in Carrick Theater, which is just behind me. So you would go down the hall and come in through Carrick, buy your book, or bring a book that you already own. Ada will sign it for you, and we've got a process for doing this, so it's as smooth running as possible. Many people through the years have wondered, and wonder still today, what is poetry? Is it a kind of prayer? Is it a rant? Is it a tear-jerking blast of grief? Is it wisdom? Is it solace? Is it unanswerable wonder? We ask such questions because poetry can be all of this, and we still might not arrive at a final answer. That's because, like any art, poetry keeps changing. It's an art form that invites renewal, ongoing invention, and surprise. It follows certain traditions and just as soon departs from them. While poetry obviously has a tie to the personal experiences of the poet, our gathering this afternoon proves that poetry also has a public voice. When the poet's voice speaks to us, we feel it. And suddenly the public presentation surpasses its broad scale and becomes intimate. That transfer from the public dimension to a realm more intimate is no small task, and surely that is some of the loved labor that goes into making the art. Why bother with composing a line instead of the tedious sentence? What's the point of a simile or a metaphor? Why paint so starkly with words? And why instill all of this orchestration with lulling sound and rhythm? Because all of that is the art. It shows the poet not merely in the process of feeling and thought, it also shows the poet at work. Is making art a kind of work? It certainly is. The poet is constantly refining her skills, always scratching the page to find new ways to apply the hands-on tools of composition in order to give new life to the spirit that pulses through every human effort, whether it is struggle or joy. And yet, the best poems escape the steps of their composition. Chalk that up to the magic of the poet's passion to do this life-giving work. Our best artists leave this kind of vitality on the page for any of us and lift their voice to the air that we may hear it as it intermingles with the lovely things in this world. This is the sort of gift I believe Ada Limón will bring to us this afternoon. To introduce her more formally, however, I would like to invite Laura Martin to the podium. Laura is a senior English major here at Transy from Winchester. Laura.
This evening, the Transylvania University community is honored to welcome our current United States Poet Laureate, Ada Limón. Limón grew up in Sonoma, California, and now lives right here in Lexington, where she writes, teaches remotely, and hosts a critically acclaimed poetry podcast called The Slowdown. Limón earned her bachelor's degree in drama from the University of Washington and went on to graduate with an MFA in poetry from the creative writing program at New York University. Limón's poetry has won her many honors, including the National Book Critics Circle Award for Poetry for her book, The Carrying. The United States Librarian of Congress appointed Limón as our 24th Poet Laureate this past July, a position of great honor which she views as, quote, an opportunity to work in the service of poetry and to amplify poetry's ability to restore our humanity and our relationship to the world around us, end quote. After reading her 6th and most recent poetry collection, The Hurting Kind, I can confidently attest to this incredible power of poetry that Limón describes. With the deep emotional sincerity of her work, it comes as no surprise that so many readers feel an intimate sense of interconnectedness while consuming her poetry. The Hurting Kind has 4 sections titled as each of the 4 seasons starting in spring. The collection reminded me of the first year of the COVID pandemic, not for any obvious allusion, but for its ability to capture how that strange time felt for me unlike anything else I've read. Though she says you cannot sum up a life, her book flows lyrically through each season, highlighting a year in life with snippets of nature and raw human emotion. The book presents a time that is solitary yet relational, a time of reflection and family, a time of quiet stillness and a deepened appreciation of nature. Limón's work evokes the ever-present natural world, a world we too often overlook as we bustle about each day. It has inspired me to live life a little slower, to allow myself to be still and simply witness. More than witnessing, her poetry encourages us to be witnessed, as it points to community and the emotions inspired when we, quote, receive and notice the receiving, end quote. Like any art, poetry affects each reader or listener in unique ways, and Limón's work is something you'll truly have to experience for yourself. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage United States Poet Laureate Ada Limón.
Hello. Hello. Look at this good-looking crowd. I love it. Hi, Kentucky. It's so good to be home. I made it home just in time to vote. This is the only problem with doing a reading in your hometown is you're like, I just want to come and hang out with y'all. I have to stand up here now, and I just want to come and hang out. Thank you so much for being here and a part of this event. It means so much to me. It's such an honor, and thank you to Transylvania University for making this all happen. I thought I would start, I think I'm going to read 10 poems. Those of you who've seen me read before often know that I give you a count so that you can count up or count down, depending on how you're feeling. So I'm going to read just 2 from Bright Dead Things, which is the first book I wrote living in Kentucky. And there's a poem here that I thought I just have to start with this poem, which is a poem that I wrote for my husband, but it's about not wanting to move to Kentucky. Now, nearly 12 years later, I'm in love with Kentucky. State bird. Confession, I did not want to live here. Not among the goldenrod, wild onions, or the drop seed, not waist high in the barrel-aged brown corn water, not with the $1 million racehorses, nor the tightly wound round hay bales, not even in the old tobacco weigh station we live in with its heavy metal safe doors that frame our bricked bedroom in the mouth of a strange beast yawning to suck us in each night like air. I denied it, this new land. But love, I'll concede this. Whatever state you are, I'll be that state's bird. The loud, obvious blur of song people point to when they wonder where it is you've gone. Thank you. Thank you. This is a poem that I wrote also when I first moved here. And I had never seen fireflies. And they were so awesome. And I was coming from New York at the time, and I named them Field Bling. This is a poem called Field Bling. Nights when it's warm and no one is watching, I walk to the edge of the road and stare at all the fireflies. I squint and pretend they're hallucinations, bright made-up waves of the brain. I call them field bling. I call them fancy creepies. It's been a long time since I've wanted to die. It makes me feel like taking off my skin suit and seeing how my light flies all on its own, neon and bouncy like a wannabe star. Thank you. And then I'll read this poem, which is the last poem of Bright Dead Things. I think it's of it as an apocalyptic love poem, which we might need right now. And it's a poem that it's a response to, when everyone says, oh, things are going to get better. and there's that moment in you where you're like, is it though? And so this is a poem that responded to that. The conditional. Say tomorrow doesn't come. Say the moon becomes an icy pit. Say the sweet gum tree is petrified. Say the sun's a foul black tire fire. Say the owl's eyes are pinpricks. Say the raccoon's a hot tar stain. Say the shirt's plastic ditch litter. Say the kitchen's a cow's corpse. Say we never get to see it. Bright future, stuck like a bum star, never coming close, never dazzling. Say we never meet her, never him. Say we spend our last moments staring at each other, hands knotted together, clutching the dog, watching the sky burn. Say it doesn't matter. Say that would be enough. Say you'd still want this, us alive, right here, feeling lucky. Thank you. My dog likes it when she makes it into poems. She was very upset that I wasn't bringing her. She would just be sort of, wandering around looking for Cheetos. I thought I'd read a few from the book The Carrying, which is the second book I wrote here in Kentucky. I have 6 books altogether, but 3 of them have been written here, which is, to me, means I'm officially live in Kentucky, I think, There's a poem for my mother, and like many people, it's not unusual, but I have a curvature in my spine, so I have scoliosis, and my mother really was proactive very early on in making sure that I wasn't in pain. And sometimes we forget that, and it wasn't until I was going to my chiropractor here, it was to physical therapy, and I had this sort of epiphany, if you will. So this is a poem for mothers, or chosen mothers, if you will. The Raincoat. When the doctor suggested surgery and a brace for all my youngest years, my parents scrambled to take me to massage therapy, deep tissue work, and soon my crooked spine unspooled a bit. I could breathe again and move more in a body unclouded by pain. My mom would tell me to sing songs to her the whole 45-minute drive to Middle Two Rock Road and 45 minutes back from physical therapy. She'd say that even my voice sounded unfettered by my spine afterward. So I sang and sang because I thought she liked it. I never asked her what she gave up to drive me or how her day was before this chore. Today, at her age, I was driving myself home from yet another spine appointment, singing along to some maudlin but solid song on the radio. And I saw a mom take her raincoat off and give it to her young daughter when a storm took over the afternoon. My God, I thought, my whole life I've been under her raincoat, thinking it's somehow a marvel that I never got wet. Thank you. They say that you're not supposed to do a humble brag anymore because they're too obvious. So I'll just make a brag, which is this poem I'm about to read. I was at the White House the other day. And I was just going as a guest, and Dr. Biden began a speech. And then midway through the speech, she just began to quote this poem. And I looked at my husband, and I just started crying. And I said, what's happening here? What's going on? What is my life? So I thought I would read this poem. Dead stars. Out here, there's a bowing even the trees are doing. Winter's icy hand at the back of all of us, black bark, slick yellow leaves, a kind of stillness that feels so mute it's almost in another year. I am a hearth of spiders these days, a nest of trying. We point out the stars that make Orion as we take out the trash, the rolling containers, a song of suburban thunder. It's almost romantic as we adjust the waxy blue recycling bin until you say, man, we should really learn some new constellations. And it's true. We keep forgetting about Antlia, Centaurus, Draco, Lacerta, Hydra, Lyra, Lynx. But mostly we're forgetting we're dead stars too. My mouth is full of dust, and I wish to reclaim the rising, to lean in the spotlight of street light with you toward what's larger within us, towards how we were born. Look, we are not unspectacular things. We've come this far, survived this much. What would happen if we decided to survive more, to love harder? What if we stood up with our synapses in flesh and said no? No to the rising tides, stood for the many mute mouths of the sea, of the land. What would happen if we used our bodies to bargain for the safety of others, for Earth, if we declared it a clean night, if we stopped being terrified, if we launched our demands into the sky, made ourselves so big people could point to us with the arrows they make in their minds, rolling their trash bins out after all of this is over? She didn't read the whole poem. That would have been a lot. I'm torn between this poem and the other poem. Let's see. I'll read a poem. Yeah, I think you have to read this poem. I just said that to myself. Welcome. Welcome to my mind. I feel like it was just election day, and yeah, I'm going to read this poem. A new national anthem. The truth is, I've never cared for the national anthem. If you think about it, it's not a good song. It's too high for most of us, with the rocket's red glare. And then there are the bombs. Always, always, there is war and bombs. Once I sang it at homecoming and threw even the tenacious high school band off key. But the song didn't mean anything, just a call to the field, something to get through before the pummeling of youth. And what are the stanzas we never sing? The third that mentions no refuge could save the hireling or the slave. Perhaps the truth is, every song of this country has an unsung third stanza. Something brutal snaking underneath us as we absent-mindedly sing the high notes with the beer sloshing in the stands, hoping our team wins. Don't get me wrong, I do like the flag. How it undulates in the wind like water, elemental and best when it's humbled, brought to its knees, clung to by someone who has lost everything, when it's not a weapon, when it flickers, when it folds up so perfectly you can keep it until it's needed, until you can love it again, until the song in your mouth feels like sustenance, a song that's notes are sung by even the ageless woods, the short grass plains, the Red River Gorge, the fistful of land left unpoisoned, that song that's our birthright, that's sung in silence when it's too hard to go on, that sounds like someone's rough fingers weaving into another's, that sounds like a match being lit in an endless cave, the song that says, my bones are your bones, and your bones are my bones, and isn't that enough? Thank you. I'm going to move to my most recent collection, The Hurting Kind, and I think I've read 5 poems. It might have been 6. It was Thank you, thank you. I love poet math. It's the only math I relate to. Poet science, poet math. The other day, someone was saying, "Oh, I think that bird is not not called that or whatever." And I said, "But I read it in a poem." And he said, "It doesn't mean that's correct." I said, "Oh, yes, poet math." Poet science, poet math. I'll begin with this poem that starts the book. It's about a groundhog. Give me this. I thought it was the neighbor's cat, back to clean the clock of the fledgling robins, low in their nest stuck in the dense hedge by the house. But what came was much stranger, a liquidity moving, all muscle and bristle. A groundhog slippery and waddle thieving my tomatoes, still green in the morning shade. I watched her munch and stand on her haunches, taking such pleasure in the watery bites. Why am I not allowed delight? A stranger writes to request my thoughts on suffering. Barbed wire pulled out of the mouth as if demanding that I kneel to the trap of coiled spikes used in warfare and fencing. Instead, I watch the groundhog more closely, and a sound escapes me, a small spasm of joy I did not imagine when I woke. She is a funny creature and earnest, and she is doing what she can to survive. I just read recently to a group of 8th graders in Sarasota, Florida, and one of them said, "Oh, you're the groundhog." I was like, yeah. It was so great. I was like, I am funny and earnest and doing what I can to survive. Yes. It's another animal poem. And I'm sure, like many of you, when things are intense, or maybe even when they're not intense, you use your phone for one purpose, and it's just to look at animal videos. Whether it's a cat or a dog or a wild creature. Well, this is a time where it was a mountain lion. The mountain lion. I watched the video clip over and over. Night vision cameras flickering her eyes an unholy green. The way she looked the 6-foot fence up and down like it was nothing but a speed bump. Then cleared the man-made border in one impressive leap. A glance over the shoulder, an annoyance, and as if you could keep me out or keep me in. I don't know what it was that made me press replay and replay. Not fear, though I'd be terrified if I was face to face with her or heard her prowling in the night. It was just that I don't think I've ever made anything look so easy. Never looked behind me and grinned or grimaced because nothing could stop me. I liked the idea of it, though. Felt like a dream you could will into being. See a fence? Jump it. Meanwhile, I'm standing on 2 boxes. They were like, well, we could make it a little higher. I was like, yeah, let's make it higher. But then I can see you, actually. This is helpful. This is a poem from my grandfather, Francisco Carlos Limón, who was born in San Juan de los Lagos, near Jalisco in Mexico. And I think that oftentimes when we get to be artists and we get to make art, it's good to honor people who didn't get to make art, but were artists. Heart on fire. As a foster child, my grandfather learned not to get in trouble. Mexican and motherless, dead as she was from tuberculosis, he practiced words in a new language and kept his slender head down. When the other boys begged him to slip in the music shop's upper window to steal harmonicas for each of them, music being important, thievery being secondary, he refused. When the cops came to spot the boys who robbed the music store, they could easily find the ones spitting broken notes into the air, joyously mouthing the stainless steel, mimicking men on street corners busking for coins. But not my grandfather. He knew not to risk it all for one stolen moment of exaltation. It's easy to imagine this is who I come from. A line of serious men who follow the rules. But might I add that later he was a dancer, a singer, an actor whose best roles ended up on the cutting room floor, a cut-up, a ham who liked a good story, who would have told you life was a series of warnings, but also magic. Once he was sent for a box of matches, and he put that box of strike anywheres in the pocket of his madras shirt and ran home. He ran so fast to be on time, to be good, and when he did so, the whole box ignited. So he was a boy running down the canyon road with what looked like a heart on fire. He'd laugh when he'd tell you this. A heart on fire, he'd say, so you'd remember. It's funny how sometimes you read something and it just brings that person right back. I just had this like, whoo, here he is. It was great. Hi. It was just El Dia de los Muertos, and I'm sure many of you celebrated make ofrendas, and I made mine. And this is a poem that I think is a little bit about resurrection. And I don't know if you know of the instrument, the jawbone, but it is an actual instrument. It's wonderful. But it is a jawbone of a donkey or a horse, and you play the loose teeth in the jaw, and it makes this incredible sound. So this is a poem dedicated to that. Instrumentation. If I could ever play an instrument for real, I like the idea of playing the jawbone, the rattle of something dead in your hands, the thing that beats back at the sky and says, I'm still here, even though clearly the donkey isn't here, or the horse isn't here. Just the teeth and the jaw making music like resurrection or haunting or just plain need. What I like most is that the jawbone is an idiophone, which I misread once as ideaphone. But an idiophone is just that it makes music by the whole thing vibrating without strings. I want that kind of reeling in the wind, all the loose teeth, all the old bones of the skull, all the world, and the figure swaying with its stick to make untuned music, even death cannot deny. And I'll close with this poem, and then we can have some questions, and maybe some answers, or not answers. Thank you again for being here. It's so lovely to see you all. I see so many familiar faces. And again, thank you to Transylvania University for making this happen. When I was in the very early days of the pandemic in March, I was forsaken by poetry. I kept thinking that we needed other things that weren't poetry, like vaccines or, healthcare, health insurance, all of those things. And yet people would call me and be like, don't you think we need poetry now more than ever? And I was like, I don't know, do we? I think that's very important. I love it very much. And so I kept trying to think of how I was going to write a poem when I was full of anxiety and fear. And I think it's proven to be a thing that's hard to make art when you're anxious or you're fearful. But this is the poem that came out of that, which was sort of, in some ways, a list of subjects I just couldn't bear to write about. But then, of course, I wrote about it. The end of poetry. Enough of osseous and chickadee and sunflower and snowshoes, maple and seeds, samara and shoot. Enough chiaroscuro, enough of thus and prophecy, and the stoic farmer and faith and our Father, and 'tis of thee. Enough of bosom and bud, skin and God not forgetting, and star bodies and frozen birds. Enough of the will to go on, or not go on, or how a certain light does a certain thing. Enough of the kneeling and the rising and the looking inward and the looking up. Enough of the gun, the drama, the acquaintance's suicide, the long-lost letter in the dresser. Enough of the longing and the ego and the obliteration of ego. Enough of the mother and the child and the father and the child. And enough of the pointing to the world, weary and desperate. Enough of can you see me, can you hear me? Enough I am human, enough I am alone and I am desperate. Enough of the animal saving me. Enough of the high water. Enough of sorrow. Enough of the air and its ease. I am asking you to touch me. Thank you. Thank you. This is so, you can text questions. This is, I feel like an old person saying this, but I'm like, this is so amazing, the technology.
The means to send your question through text should be in the program. And
That's on the QR code, or if you go to the website. If you want me to give you the number, it is 859-428-7801. That would be this area code, 859-428-7801.
It's amazing.
this is so we don't have to walk through the crowd.
Do we have any? Not yet? Oh, not yet. We don't have any.
Here we go.
Okay, here's one.
Do you write every day?
Oh, yeah, I actually, I do write every day. I don't write a poem every day. Sometimes I write a to-do list. But I do. I have a journal that, it's a blank journal. It's full of words, but it doesn't have lines. And I carry it with me everywhere. It's in the green room now. And I used to think that I needed a journal just for poems, and a journal for my dreams, and then a journal that was my to-do list. And then I just realized that they were all one life. And so now I wake up, I set my intention is in my journal, and then I sort of move through it, and it has a to-do list. And then on the sides and on next pages are lots of seeds of poems and ideas of poems, and sometimes whole drafts of poems. But yeah, I write every day.
This is from Emily at Sayre School. At the beginning of class, my AP Literature class has listened to your podcast
Yay.
and truly enjoyed every one as we discussed the meaning behind each one.
Oh.
How has hosting the Slowdown impacted you as you have impacted others, sharing such intrinsic poetry and your own story?
Wow, it's a beautiful question. You know, the Slowdown was a real gift and, you know, just a joy of my life to do. And I'm so grateful that for your teacher and for you all to be listening to it and using it in that way. I think that for me, one of the biggest things that was so marvelous about doing it was being able to recognize and uplift other poets, sometimes poets that only had one book out, sometimes poets that didn't even have a book out. I remember being contacted by someone that said, I don't even know how you found my poem. I've only published 4 poems. And you read one on the Slowdown. And I said, well, I sit around, I read a lot of journals, and I liked your poem. So I think that has impacted me greatly, was what it was to elevate and share and spotlight poets of all ages and poets of all different backgrounds. And that's something I will take away from it wholeheartedly. It's a real gift in my life.
What have you enjoyed about Kentucky that you were surprised by?
Oh. You know, I didn't know a lot about Kentucky. And I knew horses. And now I just know them better. But I think that, there's a few things. And one of the things was it's just physical beauty. I don't think people talk about that enough. I mean, Kentucky is gorgeous. It's physically beautiful. I always take my family out to the Red River Gorge when they come visit, and they're always sort of blown away by it. But so many parts of it are gorgeous. I think the other thing that surprised me and has sustained me is the incredible community of writers and artists that live in this city. My friend Vaughn, I don't know where you are, but there you are. My dear friend Vaughn, who's also my representative and creative collaborator, we have breakfast meetings, and it's just so great to drive down the street and meet with her and talk about all the ideas that we're having for the Laureate ship and beyond. And I think that there are just so many amazing writers here and art makers, and I don't think that gets talked about enough, and I'm hoping that in my Laureate ship I get to shine a little bit of light on that community.
So, speaking of being a poet laureate and this public figure for poetry, wait a second. That wasn't the question I thought I was pulling up. What do you see as the future of poetry and its evolving purpose, especially thinking about such things as the climate crisis that we're in, poetry's role within public discourse and within the national conversation?
Yeah. I mean, I think that contemporary poetry right now, there's a real need and an urgency to actually connect, to communicate, and I don't think that's always been the case. I think there have been times where it's okay to write a poem just for yourself. That's beautiful, to write a quiet poem or a poem that, feels like it's just for you. But I think right now, what I'm seeing more and more of is poems that are really urgently trying to connect and reach people and create community and create change. And I think also there's a feeling in which, and I've said this before, so forgive me, but there is a level in which people ask about what poetry can do in terms of its power. And, we can't do one thing. A poetry doesn't often just offer hope, right? Because I could say, poetry can offer you hope, and then you could read, Philip Larkin poem and not feel hopeful, or I could say, it's to bring you joy or to bring you love, and then I'm just can give you a million heartbreak poems, and you're not going to feel joy and love. You're going to feel achy and weepy. And I think that poetry's power and what poetry can do is to remind us right now that we're living, feeling human beings. And I think just feeling is what we need right now, because I think we have gone through this moment of becoming so numb. And a lot of that is what we've had to do. We've had to numb to go from one thing to the next, one crisis to the next, one chaotic moment to the next. But I think we have to remember that we are full of feelings, and those feelings are powerful, and those feelings connect us. And hopefully those feelings can move us to action.
Someone has texted that they have synesthesia and would like to share that your poetry sheds many beautiful hues of greens and blues that remind me of the many different plants together in a forest. How do you see your own poetry?
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. I love that idea of colors being related to images and words. I think for me, I write my own poems to help me recommit to the world. And every time I write a poem, it makes me want to live in the world. And it's that deep attention, that paying attention, that reminds me to love it, and that reminds me that I'm part of it. And when I'm feeling disconnected, it is my way to write myself back into the world. So it may not be a poem that is necessarily meant for someone else or always meaning to connect or to reach a wide audience. And sometimes it's a poem just for me to think, you know what? You love this world. You are in this world. You are here. Don't miss it.
So in the audience, we have a number of students from Sayre and a number of students from Scapa, and within that there are a host of questions asking some related things about coming into finding a literary community, coming into finding one's own voice, going about the process of getting brave enough to send one's poetry out, handling rejection, and telling you you're amazing.
Oh, that's my favorite question. I think that it's, I will say this, that in terms of finding your community and figuring out who it is that, can support you and sustain you, is that when someone is that person that you can share one of your poems with or whatever art you're making, and they take the time to look at it and say something about it or give you, any kind of feedback, make sure that you also do that for them, and in whatever way or shape that looks like, because it's a reciprocal. And I think sometimes as artists we can be like, hey, read my thing, and then I think we also have to be like, let me read your thing, or what is your thing that you need me to do? Because those relationships, are reciprocal. So that's a big part of finding your community. I think the other thing is when you're trying to get brave enough to send out work, to remember that all of that rejection is also a form of teaching. I used to think it was a form of rejection. A form of deep failure. And I think that I used to always get rejected twice because this was back when the letters did not come over email, they would come in the mail. And I would come home after a late night and I'd read the rejection and I'd go to bed and forget about it. And then I'd wake up and there was the rejection letter and I was like, oh no, I've been rejected twice, last night and this morning. But I do think that I learned very quickly that sometimes that rejection is a lesson. Sometimes you read that poem and you think, you know what? I still love this poem and I'm going to send it out. That's the lesson right there, right? You're learning that you are confident enough in your own work that you're going to send it out somewhere else. The next part is that sometimes you read that poem and you go, I am so glad the New Yorker did not publish that. And I can't believe I even sent it to them. There's typos. You never know. And so sometimes it's a lesson that you come back and you have to revise it. And that's good too. So I think of all those things in terms of, that's part of the learning. It's part of the process. It doesn't say anything about your worth as an artist, and certainly not as a human.
There are also a number of questions around family and what role family has played in your poetry, and thinking specifically of the lovely grandfather with his Heart on Fire poem, wondering how your Mexican roots have played a role in your poetry.
Yeah. I think it's funny. We bring so many people with us wherever we go. And I think it's important for me to recognize that I didn't get here on my own. I didn't get to be a poet on my own. You think about it, sometimes you think you're like this singular artist, or you're this singular person doing a singular thing, and you forget about how many people have supported you and aided you and helped you on the way. And I think that one of the biggest things that I take with me is that my mother said, when you go out on stage, in order to calm your breath, she said, put your hand on your heart and think of 5 people that love you. And I still do that. She told me that when I was 15 years old. And I think that, right, is like, okay, yeah, I will do that. And then they're with me. And then it feels like, okay, I can do that because they're with me. And I think when I think of my Mexican heritage, I think very much of how much my grandfather would have given to been able to risk a little bit more, to not have completely had to choose the stability. And because he did choose that stability, and because my father chose that stability, I had this firm ground to land when I chose art. And I also feel like, in terms of when we think about ancestors, every part of me, when I feel like I want to give up, when I feel like life is too hard, I think, no, this is for them. Like if I can't do it for myself in those moments, I think I will do this for them, if that's getting out of bed or whatever it is. And I think that's a huge lesson, because there's so many times where, you think you've suddenly just sort of ended up someplace, when in reality, it was a lot of work and a lot of generations before you that took that work. And he instilled that in me, and it's something I carry with me now.
One more question.
Yes.
A lot of writing involves confronting your deepest self. How do you bring yourself to write the things you're most afraid to write?
I was going to make a snarky joke. I was going to say bourbon, but that's actually not true. I can't drink and write, because drinking just makes me want to talk. Doesn't make me want to write. I think the biggest thing that I do when I am trying to confront something that's tough, and I've said this before to the dear, marvelous Crystal Wilkinson, which is, I've told students that, don't go to the bottom of the well unless you have a ladder out. And I use that for myself, which is that if I know I'm going to go to a place that is hard, I make sure that there is a light, and that light might be meeting a friend afterwards, or that light might be, I'm going to binge watch something on Netflix, I know, after I do this work. Or, it might just be finding some hope or some light within the poem. But finding ways to protect and hold yourself with tenderness is equally as important to finding ways to being brave and courageous and resilient, all those wonderful words. And so I will finish something that's intense or has been intense, and I will literally put my palm on it, whether it's longhand or literally on the computer screen, and I will say, You get to stay here. I get to lay you down. I get to go have a drink, right? I get to go hug my friends, snuggle the dog, have some tea, whatever it is. But you get to stay here. And I think that's important, that the work is important, but our health and mental health and our hearts and our whole beings and our wholeness is really important too. So when you're doing that big work, find little harm reduction models for yourself, because like Laureate Owen says, the goal is longevity, which means we want you to write, we want you to make art. I want to make art, but I want to do it for a long time. And because I want to do it for a long time, I want to make sure I protect this machine that makes it. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. Go Kentucky. Thank you.
As a reminder to go to the book signing, you can exit any of these doors and walk down either of these two hallways to the front.